Welcome everyone to CG seminar stroke webinar number 293. It's getting larger, isn't it? Close to the magic 300. And today we have with us Thushari Welikala from the University of London, from St. George's University. I'll introduce her now. I think her topic is Defamiliarising the Colonial Imaginaries embedded in Interculturality. So tying together two issues of great interest to us in our webinar program, that is decolonisation and intercultural aspects of higher education. Now, Thushari's areas of interest, research areas include internationalisation of higher education, which many of our participants in the webinar program focus on, interculturality, exclusion by inclusion, and coloniality in education. I will leave it to her to introduce her topic, but let me take you through the webinar protocols. Now, remember that the webinar is being recorded. It'll be posted online on the CG website, and you'll be able to access it on YouTube there. We have our own YouTube channel. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be provided on our website. It should all be up there within a day or so. Excuse me. Now, during the webinar, please keep yourself muted unless you've been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video on either during the webinar, but of course, when you come into the Q&A part of our webinar, which is an important part of our webinar, we want you to have your microphone open and your video on if you can do that. We recommend using speaker view in the top right-hand corner there during the webinar. You can more clearly see who is talking. Now, to enter the conversation in the Q&A part, use the chat. Put forward your question or your comment in the chat. And out of the chat, I'll be able to select participants for the Q&A part of the conversation. And it's a good idea, therefore, to come forward early, because you're more likely to be selected if you do. Sometimes people put their interesting comments in the chat with 5 minutes to go, and we've already got a full speaking list by that stage. And when you're invited into the Q&A, and I'll give you a warning when that happens, I'll send you a message in the chat. You unmute yourself, as I said before, and you switch on your video, and then say who you are and where you are from, and then make your statement or ask your question of our presenter. Thushari, it's a pleasure to hand over to you at this point. The screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Thanks, Trevor, for your help so far. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today from, I know, different time zones. So warm welcome to you all. Let me quickly share my slides now.
Thanks, Thushari. We can see those.
All right. Okay. All right. So now my focus here is on interculturality. And interculturality, here I'm trying to focus on the two key points, actually. How the meanings and practices of interculturality in higher education reflect colonial imaginary. I will discuss what we mean by colonial imaginary here, and especially in relation to two, I call them fabrications of polarized self and other, and then the oneness between being and culture. So these are the kind of narratives created or publicized and continued within the field or area of interculturality. And I'm trying to kind of interrogate these imaginaries, relating them to coloniality, and to explore how this idea of polarized self and other, and the oneness between being and culture, relates to creating a particular story about coloniality of being. And later on in the discussion, I will present an ontological otherwise, that means an alternative to this polarized self and other, and the oneness between being and culture that is being highlighted in interculturality. So what I mean by ontological otherwise is that is an alternative which is not very familiar, which is not very popular. Now, my views in this presentation are informed by Sociology of Absence, which Santos talks about, and my autoethnographic reflexivity and also narrativity. These theoretical underpinnings help me to explore this particular focus, and also it helps me to narrate in a critical manner what we mean by coloniality within interculturality. So just to very briefly discuss about sociology of absence, it is called a transgressive sociology. That means something which actually moves beyond the set code of conduct. I'm not moving actually very far from set code of conduct, but I'm using narratology in a different way in this discussion. So according to Santos, when you're talking about sociology of absence, there are three moments to be considered. First, we need to think about rigorously critiquing a selected area. Now, in this presentation, I will be critiquing the idea of interculturality and the practices as well as values, and then move beyond centered or Eurocentric criticality to explore alternative ways of knowing the world. And third, identify and utilize heterogeneous knowledges. Now, these three moments are important because we are talking about coloniality, colonial imaginary. Moving on. Now, the key arguments I'm going to present in this paper have been published in the co-edited book. I have co-edited in 2021 with Dr. Margaret Kumar at Melbourne University, Australia. This is the book chapter. Now, even though my focus is not to talk about the book here, I think it will be really helpful to share with you the key questions that emerge from the chapters from this book. So this book comprises 20 chapters from various disciplines. It is in a way an interdisciplinary knowledge construction, from medicine to mathematics to social sciences and arts and design and so on and so forth. So when we analyzed the chapters, the key themes, we, certain questions emerged. Now, mainly, what is the role and the purpose of interculturality within current socio-cultural and geopolitical context? Can we justify the presence of interculturality, especially within, the current context where culture is not just an untouched pure entity? And also, how can we interrogate intercultural practices that help maintain colonial legacies within higher education and in the society in general? Now, normally we look at interculturality as a very positive thing, very positive process that help us, create peaceful, inclusive societies. But in the meantime, what happens is that throughout the history, when a narrative is created in a particular way about a particular social process or particular concept, especially in higher education, we tend to believe in that narrative. We think it is okay to believe in this because it is the story that we have been told over and over again. So within interculturality as well, we always have been thinking about its benignness, its positive aspects, without interrogating what actually are we doing in relation to intercultural learning, intercultural understanding. We have so many different adjectives, but I'm using here the notion interculturality because I think it gives us the macroness of that particular concept. And then the next question that came up was how and why the white man's burden is enacted through intercultural practices. Now, this is this allusion, the white man's burden. It is actually, I'm sure you are all familiar with Rudyard Kipling, the poet, the British poet. Now, when the US, I think it was in 1800s, he invaded Philippines, he wrote this poem explaining, yes, you need to do this because you, the white man, your burden is to civilize the rest of the world. You are there to educate the rest of the world, save the rest of the world. So go and do that. So that was what I meant by the white man's burden. How does interculturality enact the white man's burden? And then in which ways does performance and articulation of interculturality miniaturize particular ways of being and knowing and unknowing in the world? These are key questions. I think that came up emerged through the analysis of the book chapters. And I thought of sharing them because they are directly related to my talk today. Now, at the beginning, I said that I was talking about colonial imaginary. So coloniality, as you know, it is an unfinished history. It is living with us today. It will be there tomorrow. But since we are talking about decolonization, inclusive education within higher education these days, I think it is time that we kind of interrogate our accepted understandings about interculturality. It is really important to see whether it is that benign as it seems to be. So I have analyzed two different imaginaries. So the first one I'm going to discuss here is oneness between culture and being. I'm sure that you are very familiar with so many different definitions of interculturality. I'm not going to discuss any definitions here, but the key concept, the key idea of any narration, any story about interculturality is that culture and human beings, one particular person, if you take one particular person, that person is very strongly, intimately related to a particular group, particular culture, which is identified as culture. And we all know culture is a highly seductive notion. And you can interpret it in 1,000 different ways. But still, when we are talking about interculturality, the notion of culture is very taken very, I think, lightly. So it is constructed as a very singular, untouched, pure, coherent entity with permanent cultural features, values that are distinctive across nationality, ethnicity, sexuality, so on and so forth. So there are groups. And they are cultural groups. Yes, we all know culture is there. I'm not denying that there is something called culture. I know cultures are there, subcultures are there. But the thing is, when we are thinking about the current societies as well as in the past, even in very primitive societies, culture, rather than culture, we had cultures. We live cultures, multiple cultures. They are all mixed in certain ways. So strong affinities of people with one particular culture is highly problematic. And also it ignores the fact that the cultures are always in a process of becoming. There are no cultures who have become cultures or which have become cultures. They are always in the process of becoming. Now, what is interesting is if you now read 10 articles about interculturality, whatever aspects of interculturality, you will find that authors start talking about multiple identities, multiple ways of being, and all this postmodern, post-structuralist discourse will be used to talk about interculturality. However, somewhere within that article, they will come back to the oneness between culture and being. So, for example, in Adrian Holiday's 2022 article on interculturality, he cites two examples to show that how, the first one is the UNESCO report on cultural diversity, 2010. It is talking about, opposing segregation and fundamentalism, supporting pluralism, human rights. In the meantime, implies a confining and defining role of culture as the set, distinctive, spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of a society or a social group. Now you can see all this multiplicity is gone when we come to this particular latter part of the sentence, because it is talking about culture as a particular a singular entity. Another example is Diderot's interpretation of cultures as multiple. She suggests that it's the defining role is quite diverse, but when she starts talking about culture towards the end of the same sentence, look at the way the discourse changes. Each culture is the sum of assumptions and practices shared by members of a group, distinguishing them from other groups. So this other group, distinguishing nature, they are the key words. However you start the discussion, this is where we end up. And that is what I'm trying to interrogate here, resist in a sense. Now, what happens, what is wrong with this is that such interpretations, such focuses within interculturality maintains cultural comfort zones for particular cultures. So certain cultures are significant, they create globally relevant knowledges. Those cultures are rational, civilized forms of scientific narratives about being and knowing will be created within those centers. They are centers to a certain extent, whereas some parts of the world, some cultures will be identified as zone of absence, where worthless, non-scientific, local knowledge will be created. So you can see the way we interpret interculturality, even though it looks like very positive, it is for human, peace and inclusiveness. Knowingly or unknowingly, we create certain compartments, compartmentalized understanding about various parts of the world, various cultures. And the second imaginary is the self-other dichotomy, the polarized self and other. And it is very interesting right from the beginning. And I'm not sure whether this is such when you have the experience of, dwelling across different cultures, different countries, different places, spaces. So as soon as I hear this word other, othering, otherness, I always think, why do we need to talk about othering? Who is this other? You think about yourself. You become, how many times you become the other to yourself within one particular day? Within one particular day, when depending on the context, depending on the people who you are with, don't you feel you are the other to your own self? So these are the actual realities when we are thinking about human life, human interactions. But within interculturality, we have created this pseudo polarity between self and the other. Now, normally when we are thinking about higher education system today, this polarity is highly informed and justified by the colonization and coloniality, solipsism, that is self is at the center. That is the only thing that exists. And then Cartesian duality, Descartes, right? Neoliberalism, individualism, audit culture, all these things contribute to intensify the gap between the self and the other. Now, Maldonado Torres very interestingly look at what Descartes mentioned about I think, therefore I am. Now he creates a formula, sorry. And the formula says, okay, if you think about I think, that means others do not think. That implies that others do not think, or they do not think properly. Now that is the formula. If you think about therefore I am, this implies others are not, or they lack being. They should not exist, or they are dispensable. So that's very interesting, isn't it? That is how the othering or the self-other polarity is being supported by the discourse, by the theories, by the philosophical understanding within particular spaces in higher education, in the societies as well. Now, what is important here is that when we are talking about colonization, decolonization, we always talk about the West. And I don't like to use that word because it is very problematic. We always talk about Europe. Eurocentric. However, now when we're talking about this self-other polarity, is it only unique to European context? Was that initiated by Europeans? Is it unique for global North? Actually not. So for example, if you look at certain countries in global South, we have caste system, hierarchies within and across races, social stratification, and even within disciplines, we have this self-other division, binary thinking. So binary thinking is not actually unique to coloniality and European context. It is there. However, then why are we talking about self-other polarity here? I'm talking about it in relation to interculturality because Eurocentric binary thinking is more relevant here. And it has more strong influence on interculturality, learning, teaching, and knowledge creation. Now, for example, the self-other polarity that is highlighted in interculturality contributes to strengthening and maintaining colonial designs of divide and control. Now, as we all know, one particular strategy, one successful strategy actually was used by the colonizers, divide and rule. To divide and rule, you needed binaries. Binaries supported that. And also the binary understanding about self and other creates the illusion that there is a neat split between people, between groups, between context, which is actually not the case in real life. Real life, you know, we live complex spaces. Our lives are highly complex. And also this split between self and other informs and creates global hierarchical value systems. So even though we think interculturality is there to help us to live peacefully, to live in harmony, to interact with other people without any issues, it creates particular value systems that are problematic, that are hierarchical. And actually in real life communication also, it is not neutral. But when you include those binaries within the definitions, within the way you interpret certain concepts, they become highly problematic. And also they utilize self-other bifurcation to analyze and to justify global geopolitics. And I will give you some examples. Right, and the most risky thing, dangerous aspect of this is that it makes us forget the temporality of coloniality through binary thinking. It is it must be a temporal thing, but it is not temporal because of such strategies used by the colonizer plus higher education system through maybe inclusion. Internationalization is another area. And here my focus is interculturality. Now I'm just sharing with you one particular example, how and where this classification by, beginning of coloniality and the formation of new imaginaries through classification. Now, classifications are important in certain areas of life, but when it comes to an area like interculturality, when we try to group and classify in a strong way, it has its own implications. Now, going back to the colonial history, what happened was that colonizer is the creator of these races. They wanted to divide and rule. They wanted people to be identified, categorized in a particular way. So when they went to particular places, they saw brown people, they were called Indian, darker people, black people, and then mestizo. Mestizo are those people who are mixed. So they didn't have a name. They thought, okay, mestizo is fine, right? So they created those races, and there's a particular strategy behind that. This manifested difference. Now, when you have races, the people, now that I'm using narratology here, because when narratives are created, we live the narratives. And narratives are fabrications, but they become reality after a while. So that is what the colonizer did. So the fabrication of race is now very intimate reality for us. We go for war, we kill each other, we do all sorts of harmful things because of, in the name of race. So this manifested difference, it did something else as well. Now it offered or attributed racialized identities, degree of humanity. Now the lighter one's skin is, the closer to full humanity one is. So on the top of the hierarchy will be the white-skinned Europeans, and it goes down. And domination is actually always possible when you have people who are not equal to you. So equality is a problem when especially within the context of colonization, equality is a huge problem. So that is one reason why the races are important, why the divisions are important. And what happens is that this biologically and sociologically wrong, they are biological, sociological myths, we can say, right? Biologically also it cannot happen. Sociologically also we cannot believe that we belong to that race, this race, I have a brown identity. I actually don't use those terms now. So what happens is that when these narratives are created, the social imaginary of whiteness. Now, whiteness is not only white people, it is a state of being. It's a way of thinking, it's a value system. Now it becomes very strong and intimate, and we don't even feel that we are being affected by whiteness, right? We live, we breathe in, we breathe whiteness within our workplaces, within the society. So it becomes an ongoing, unfinished history. Now coloniality is always an unfinished history, so does whiteness. Now what whiteness does a lot of things, but mainly it positions human bodies. It positions human nature, human ways of thinking, our way of thinking, our way of being. Whiteness controls us in a particular way. Now, whiteness actually exists in the absence of the white bodies. Now, what does that mean? Now, for example, as soon as we hear the word white, especially these days, because our bandwagon is decolonization, we think we are pointing fingers at our white colleagues. No, that is not what whiteness means. Whiteness is a way of being, a set of values and state of being. So even if I carry a non-white body, I can live whiteness because it's a value. So when somebody lives and believes and loves this social imaginary of whiteness, what happens is that we can very easily get into the binary thinking. Now, especially now relating this to interculturality, now self-other binary is strengthened by colonial thinking. So self is the authoritative, rational, cultured, efficient, civilized person at the center. So within the intercultural context, interculturality as a field, what we are always trying is to empathize with the other, understand the other, right? Let them show how things should happen when it comes to higher education. What do you mean by knowing and unknowing? So self is there to help that Christian philanthropic view about the other. Now, what happens is this kind of attitude towards the other strengthens the ongoing power structures, and it highlights the difference. And I think that is the other aspect of interculturality. It always highlights the difference. Why does it highlight difference? When you talk about difference, it is easy to differentiate. So that is how classification, segregation by classification can happen. So you can see, even though we kind of embrace interculturality, embrace sometimes, oh yes, differences are there, let me address the differences. Let me understand the other person. And actually in real life, we cannot understand people, and also understanding a culture or understanding a person does not mean that we will not have conflicts. That is the actual nature of our interactions. Now here, I want to share with you one example to show how these binaries actually are in action in real life. These are the dangers. These are the risks of highlighting differences, highlighting binary otherness within interculturality. Now, these are examples. I have taken this from Manel Herat's blog at Liverpool Hope University. Now, she has written a beautiful article about how the Russian-Ukraine war was kind of interpreted by certain reporters. Now, this is one reporter from CBS. These are US located reporting services. So this particular, I'm not using the names. You can see the names there in the article, they have been written. Now, this particular foreign correspondent reporting from Ukraine says, Ukraine isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, so goes on. So you can see the discourse used. Now you can see self-other binary working in real life. And then again, another NBC reporter says, these are not refugees from Syria. They are Christians. They are white. They're very similar to us. So when I'm reading this, I feel that, okay, because I'm white, because I'm not Christian, it is fine if I die, within this kind of a situation. So you can see the implied meanings here. And a prime minister in another European country said this, these people are intelligent. I know you can read, but I'm kind of highlighting this. These people are intelligent. They are educated people. This is not the refugee wave that we have been used to. People we were not sure about their identity. People with unclear pasts, who could have even been terrorists. Now you can see. Now this is a real life living experience that shows the risk of binary thinking, which is always highlighted in interculturality. Now, this is another example I have selected from A Tempest. Now, I don't want you to kind of think about literature here, but I thought when we find that self-other polarity is doing something harmful, interculturality, how we think about interculturality should be questioned, contested, resisted. The created identities for us, actually, we just, you may have seen, we always talk about, I'm a brown person, I have this brown identity, I'm from so-and-so culture. So we all have cultures, that's a different matter. But the thing is, when we try to overemphasize the difference in relation to cultures and our identities, whatever the identity is, right? We all live multiple identities. What happens is that certain moments in extreme situations in the world, people can exploit it. People can make use of these differences, this binary thinking to harm people, hurt people. So that was one example I shared. Now here, I'm using this to show that once we have understood that, yes, I have been cheated through the colonial legacy. Yes, I have been told lies after lies about myself. I need to wake up. Right? So this is a very good example for that. Now I have selected this from A Tempest. You all know about The Tempest by Shakespeare. Now this is a textual intervention done by Aim Zheja. It is called A Tempest. Now very briefly, The Tempest by William Shakespeare, it is, the interpretation is that it is about colonization. It's a colonial narrative. Now, the main protagonist is Prospero, and he has two servants, Caliban and I can't remember the other one. So this is Caliban. Now, Caliban, they were kind of being servants for this person, Prospero, for years. And one fine day, they understand what is happening to them. They accepted the narrative of being a servant. And towards the end of A Tempest, Caliban says this, talk to Prospero. And he says, Prospero, you are the master of illusion. Lying is your trademark. And you have lied so much to me, lied about the world, lied about me, that you have ended by imposing on me an image of myself. underdeveloped, you brand me inferior. That is the way you have forced me to see myself. I detest that image. What's more, it's a lie. But now I know you, you old cancer, and I know myself as well. Now I'm using this in a metaphorical way to show the importance of kind of waking up and kind of resisting or interrogating or contesting the identities that have been created for us, for each of us, regardless of whether you are white or not. Certain identities, certain narratives, certain fabrications about ourselves, our society are really harmful. And interculturality, unfortunately, knowingly or unknowingly, kind of intensifies or add fuel into these kind of stories. Now, due to the impact of this colonial imaginary means that the way we have been made believe to accept our own selves, to look at our own selves through interculturality, we always, over and over again, we say, look, you know, students who are coming from India are different, right? They have very different value systems. Students from China, they have different value systems, and they don't talk in group work. You know, these are very common, you know, used, misused, overused jargon in interculturality and internationalization as well. So what do they do actually? Are they helping us to make positive human encounters? I don't think so, because the reason is that the moment we highlight the differences, yes, differences are there. I'm not saying that all the people are, you know, same. All cultures are same. That is not the reality. But the point is that when we, through interculturality or internationalization, when we highlight the difference and say, look, you need to teach that person, you need to be like that person, that these things cannot happen in real life. What happens instead is that we create the picture that encounters between people from different cultures are inevitably difficult, if not traumatic or impossible. Therefore, interculturality as the savior gives us a list of intercultural capabilities, intercultural competencies, whatever we call them. So they are quite mechanical, and we have to follow the rule, and then the understanding, you know, assumption is that one fine day, once we have done a course or the training, we will become interculturally fluent, interculturally competent, whatever it is. And that is not going to happen. That has never happened as well. And then such tales, such narratives frames intercultural as an international phenomenon and ignores within culture differences. Now, what happens is always, whenever we are talking about interculturality, we forget our local societies, local communities. Like, for example, some years ago, I did some research in India, Mumbai, and the students were always talking about internationality, interculturality in relation to their different prantas, rather than talking about England or global north or whatever. So within country, within group, even within subgroups, we have differences. So interculturality, what do we mean by intercultural actually? Is it always an international phenomenon? That is how it is kind of narrated in the field of interculturality, intercultural education. That is not helpful as well. And also it prescribes action within human encounters. This is how you should do when you go for business with Japanese people. This is how you should talk to Indian people, right? There are some prescriptions. And then they make people believe that once the cultural differences are understood or sorted out, one can become intercultural. That's it. That's not a process or one-off journey, linear journey. And it implies that human interactions are apolitical, neutral. It is not the case. Merely because we understand someone else's culture, we are not going to have any kind of positive, very happy interaction, negotiation with people, because all the time, our communication, our engagement with the other is political. They are not neutral. Even think about your engagement, your conversations, your communication with your own family members. There are some power relationship there. They are not neutral. But when we are talking about human interaction, human communication between people in interculturality, they are created as if nothing else, only self, other, and differences are the key. And then the engagement with cultures is superficial. Now, I don't know whether you have read anything about interculturality, where they discuss about cultural ways or practices that can be harmful. What do we do about these things? Now, certain cultures, they practice female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and there are thousands of cultural practices which are not very positively impacting on human relationships, human lives. Are they okay? What do we do within interculturality to those kind of cultural practices? And what happens is that when we are kind of creating these myths about interculturality, myths about human interaction, human beings, human nature, we kind of ignore the actual authentic issues, challenges, nature of human interaction. Like, for example, people always act and respond to context, situations, and moments rather than cultures. We don't think about the person's culture when we talk, when we interact, right? When we want to solve a problem, we look at the person, the context, right? The moment, the situation. And also meaningful interactions between people are provisional almost all the time. They never become final. Actual human interactions do and need not always lead to mutual understanding. We interact with people. We don't go into depths and try to understand people. It is not necessary and it is not possible. And also conflict and disagreement are inevitable in communication between people, as Bakhtin very clearly noted. You can't avoid that. If you avoid it, it is kind of a very artificial conversation. You can avoid, it becomes very surface level. And then making effort to understand cultural other within this context is actually not very productive. So within this context, we need radical philosophical and ontological shift to consider or reconsider self, other, and culture within interculturality. So that's the main focus here. So because interculturality has these aspects which are not really helpful, we need to think about other ways of thinking about human interaction. And here I'm proposing, now I'm not proposing you to, just forget everything what we have done so far in relation to scholarly work about interculturality, and then think about non-self concept. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting here is that there are caveats in the way we articulate, in the way we practice interculturality. Therefore, it is helpful because we are talking about decolonization, right? Coloniality of higher education. It is really important that we think about other ways of interrogating interculturality and its challenges. So because I have been talking a lot so far, now I'm going to talk about non-self, and I have to say that I'm not a theologian. I'm not talking about it in relation to theology, but as a philosophical concept. So if you take 2 minutes, now I will ask you the question, do you believe that you have a self? Now, I'm not talking about yourself. Do you have a self? So can we spend 2 minutes, I'm thinking about time as well, 2 minutes and explore, identify where your self is. You can use the chat function or put your hand up and talk. Where is yourself? Anybody who would like to share their understanding, or did you find anything in relation to yourself?
I could butt in, but I couldn't find my hand raising option.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. I'll do this instead of my question that I was going to ask later, which is that I think, I mean, one of the interesting things about my work with self and virtual selves is that actually this sense of who we are and exploring self starts to break down when we move into these sort of virtual selves. We can play with different versions of ourselves, and we can even see ourselves on the screen, and that then becomes more of a challenge. So I'm wondering if that links at all to this exploration you're talking about, which is, you know, the myth that is a self becomes more obvious when we create these virtual selves. Do you think there's any?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, there is it's a good link. So what is self? Where is the self when we are talking about virtual relationships, virtual communication, virtual meetings? That's a very good point. Thank you so much. And it invited me to think more about non-self in that sense as well. I would like to talk to you later, if you could. Yeah, thank you. Any other ideas?
Thushari, we do have a question from someone too, when you're ready for it.
Yeah.
That's from Marta Kozlowska. And I promised Marta that she would be able to ask her question, so I'd like to bring her in if I can. Marta.
All right, if I may. Thushari, I'm very curious about your own thoughts when it comes to medical education, especially the later stages, and colonial imaginary. I would like to focus in particular on post-colonial countries such as Sri Lanka, and sending the medical doctors over to UK to finish off, in a way, the proper medical education. What are your thoughts about this, especially in the context of the Prospero quote you brought up earlier?
All right, very interesting question. You mean that those who have graduated from Sri Lanka will come here to do their postgraduates?
No, what I mean specifically, doctors who have completed their training already.
Yeah.
They are sent over here as junior doctors.
Yeah.
To complete, in a way, to complete
MRCP and stuff. Yeah, that's a very colonial, thank you very much for that question. That's a very colonial practice. The thing is, as I mentioned, yes, the thing is that the story is that once you have got your graduation, you become a junior doctor. And then if you want to become a surgeon, okay, go to UK, go to Australia, get yourself qualified. Now, these are the major structural issues when it comes to coloniality, and how can we address these things is very difficult. That is why I say that when a narrative is created at national level, international level, or local level, it is very difficult to resist when it becomes a system. So Martha, that is what has happened. It has become a system. It is a structured system, very difficult to challenge.
To be honest, this is what I've noticed myself when I first encountered that. And I was a little bit surprised by actually people from post-colonial countries adopting this sort of narrative.
Yeah, that is what we mean by whiteness.
Yes, of course.
So that is why whiteness happens without the body, without white bodies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
you. Simon, can I continue very quickly, or
if you want to go back to it, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I've got one more.
I was just starting, talk about the concept of non-self. Now, in Buddhism, what we believe is that all living creatures live a series of transient experiences, because two key concepts I'm trying to talk about here is that anicca, transiency, and non-self. There's no self because everything is transient. So what we mean by self is something which is not there. If I touch my body, I touch my head. I know there are some organs inside the framework of my body, which I call my body, but I don't know where my self is. There's no self actually. So in Buddhism, it very scientifically, Lord Buddha has analyzed this, and he mentions, I'm trying to be as simple as possible, that self is a series of experiences, nothing else. They are very temporal. temporary experiences, because the only truth about life is transiency, uncertainty. When we are in transient, nothing is permanent. So there's no self, but a series of experiences. They are interdependent. They're not coherent as well. And only eternal existence in the universe is non-existence. That is what Buddhism says. So things, perceptions, experiences, cultures, whatever we call them, sensations, bodies arise, persist for a while, and then they go back to the nature. So we die. So everything is subject to decay. And then body, when you're talking about body, it is like a garment we are wearing. Body is a collection of elements. They come together for a short period of time. And then the realization of the impermanence and the temporal discontinuity of our life is that non-self eliminates the myth that one is a self. We just live here for a permanent, for a temporary period of, maybe one day. Some babies are stillborn. So self, what is the self there? And one good example is we dream. I can dream myself as the queen, and I get up. Am I the queen or Thushari? What am I? So what is the self? So in Buddhism, we say that there's nothing called self. It is an illusion. So as soon as we get rid of this illusion, a lot of problems, challenges we've encountered today can be addressed. Now, one interesting author, if you want to read it, biologically also this is true. And now what we, in our book, one truth we found is that what we call new knowledge in the West or in the global North is actually 100 years old knowledge in our societies, in other societies. So this is one like that. Now in cognitive neuroscience, actually in particular, people are doing a lot of research to understand what do we mean by self. Now Anil Seth, I think he's at Sussex University, is somebody who does very interesting research about self, but he very clearly says actually there's no self. What we identify as self is a series of hallucinations, experiences. So that is true scientifically as well. He says that our experience of the world around us and ourselves are kinds of controlled hallucinations, nothing else. So there's no self scientifically as well. So now going back to interculturality, when we are thinking in alternative ways, now we forget about the difference, the self, the binary we are talking about in interculturality, in global north, and turn towards some concepts like non-self. What happens is that non-self concept help us to problematize the construction of the polarized self-other. If there is no self, no other. No problem then. And then highlighting that every living being is equal. What is important is that in Buddhism, we believe it doesn't happen like that in practice. We believe that everybody is equal because we don't have selves. We are powerless. COVID was one good example. All the people who are so-called powerful and powerless got caught to that. COVID showed how helpless we are, regardless of our power. And then non-self concept invites us to understand the individual. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with the term individual. Now, individual is opposite of individual. Individual is the multiplicity of our being. We are not one being. And now again, in interculturality, we talk about belonging, agency, individual empowerment, citizenship, but they are all myths. Because when we are multiple beings, we don't belong anywhere. We don't have agency because our agency is being controlled by the governance, by the university, by our line managers, by husbands, by our parents, whatever. So agency is also to a certain extent a fabrication. Empowerment. Individuals are not, individuals. Thank you, Simon. I will be very quick. And also non-self encourages individuals to distance themselves from self-centered attachments. And then it is very easy to engage in meaningful conversations with the other. So you can read, I'm not going to read that. So what happens is that differences and similarities are not that important when it comes to meaningful encounters, when we are not talking about self. because the problem in interculturality is the self. We are always highlighting self, looking at the world in terms of the self, and that itself is a big problem. So that now in this talk, I was trying to interrogate certain aspects of interculturality. I call them fabrications, narratives, and how to suggested some ways to resist these narratives. And I proposed non-self as an alternative way of thinking about these myths contributed by interculturality. Thank you very much.
Thushari, that was really brilliant, but we've run out of time nearly. I'm going to bring in a couple of people though quickly, and Margaret Kumar is one. Margaret, are you there?
I'm unmuted. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Thushari, thank you so much. So nice to be working with you. And I suppose we could almost just about write another book at the rate you were talking and going. Now, what I'm going to do, Thushari, in this, I had so many questions, but I think I'm going to go backwards in the way I was writing my notes. And you talked about the non-self concept. And then I had Marta talking about post-colonialism. And I'm just going to give you an anecdote, first of all. Start off with an anecdote about myself. Sometimes I'm asked, who are you? What is your real name? And when I graduated, I had about 6 names to the graduation certificate. And they were all parts of myself. And in it, it came back to the word of culture and the way you were talking about culture. And I know that I was taken aback when people said to me, what's your culture? And I'm thinking, where is my culture? I don't know. It's because I have so many concepts of being and selves, you see? And that was very good, the way you've presented us with these concepts that are disrupting. Disrupting in the sense that it is all a sense of becoming. And I love the way you brought in the concept of teaching and learning and the way we have assumptions and impositions placed on the identity of students. And your suggestions as to how to address this was very important. The way you looked at concept and feelings and realities and the concept of the changing selves and the interchanging self that a student may have within a day. Just moving quickly, I had a look at your concepts and how you disrupted the meaning of culture and showed it through the defining roles that people had and the fact of the imaginary and the concept of brownness and whiteness. And sometimes I say to myself, am I brown or am I white in this sense? So the fact that you have that suffix of the ness in it, that's really important for me too. The sense of becoming coming through that way. And I love the way you talked about whiteness being a sense of being. And I noticed, Thushari, in all the things that you've mentioned today, there is the inner, the thought that comes through is we all need to develop a new set of vocabulary in the way we address ourselves, in the way we look at things, and the way we relate to others. So doing that would be a challenging task, I gather, for all of us. Thank you, Thushari.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Simon.
Thushari, I think I'll bring in one more person and then let you make a final statement before we close. We usually run about 5 minutes over time. But Tamina Yasmin Shoa has been waiting for a while, and I'd like her to come in at this point if she's there. Tamina?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Good.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. My question, I think, is quite initial one, and I'm not really sure that it is quite relevant with your talk or not. Because I am also interested about the post-colonial theories and everything. And what I initially got to know that post-colonial understanding about the cultural differences says it's highly recognized by the Western pattern. That means Western or European world actually making the cultural identities over here. And they are also explaining the cultural conflicts that is happening, especially in the global South or global North, in their own way of understanding. So this, I think, is not, it's not appropriate because of the colonial realities that has happened in the global South or North is different, so that our cultural identities come in a different way. So I was wondering that, I know that there is some significant aspects of culture in our identity. So whatever you're talking about self, not in the abstract form, but myself is quite, in a bit quite way, defining by my cultural identities. So apart from that Western pattern of understanding culture, can we look forward to have some basic idea of cultural identity that we can take that is not impacted by the colonial realities? So do you think about it, because you had read so many things on it? So do you have any idea about it? So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So do you want to know whether we have ways of identifying Western, getting rid of Western identities and finding, is that what you mean? Finding our own identities?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so my answer to that will be, Tasmina, that what is identity is itself, regardless of coloniality, identity itself is a problematic thing, problematic concept. I use the word identification. Like, for example, if I'm thinking about myself, I have now multiple identities depending on the context in which I am. Like, for example, at home, I have the identity of a mother, a wife, sister, whatever. And as soon as I go to my university, I have a different other set of identities, and they are highly temporal, context situated. So I always do not, I like not to think about that I have a particular identity. I have identities. I am a collection of identities. That is my way of thinking about identity.
Oh, I got your point, but sorry, may I have some seconds? Because we cannot be apart from our cultural identity in some way. Being in the South, where we have our different language, a different way of life, different code of conducts and everything. So do you think that culture individually have some significant things in our identity?
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't know whether it is only towards identity. I would like to use the word way of being. Our life worlds are, to a certain extent, to a great extent, depending on who we are and where we are, colored, shaped by the so-called culture. But the thing is, what is culture is the problem. Now, for example, if I come from Sri Lanka, I come from a particular part of Sri Lanka, rural part of Sri Lanka. The culture in my house is different from my next door neighbor's culture. Right? The culture I live is very different from my own brother's culture.
Yeah, yes.
So
exactly.
that's the complexity of the notion of culture. So that is why I do not like to kind of embrace these notions, which are actually not very closer to me. Yes, I have a culture. I have so many cultures, actually, if I'm thinking about myself. I think it's the case with you as well. Even though we always try to, there is a risk of trying to affiliate ourselves to a particular location culturally.
Oh, okay, thank you. I got your point.
I think that's a really helpful note on which to end. I mean, I find that argument very convincing. Multiple identities, multiple cultures, that we carry them, and these are different ways of being or lives. I think you've added a lot to our program coming in today. Thushari, feel free to come forward again in our webinar program and continue this discussion. I mean, obviously we need more than an hour, to explore these ideas. I mean, what you laid out for us was tremendously rich, and the comments in the chat, I think, are showing that. People are very appreciative and really quite sparked by different things you've said. So let's continue that. Can I remind everyone of two things? One is that our next webinar which will be held on Thursday, is going to take us to Ukraine. The first time since the Russian invasion. We'll be talking about higher education in Ukraine, and we have with us Anatoly Oleksienko, who's played such a prominent role worldwide in higher education circles in highlighting the situation in Ukraine, and Serhiy Kovit from the National University of Kiev. I think that'll be a really important and interesting discussion. We've also had a discussion about higher education in Russia as well recently, and so we're keeping an eye on that part of the world. The other thing, of course, is the CG conference. Now, the CG conference is now very close. It's at a week's time, 24th, Tuesday the 24th, and Wednesday the 25th, like a succession of webinars with breaks in between them. Tremendously rich keynotes and international panels and all of the CG projects. We've had 1,100 registrations, but I think our redoubtable Director of Communications, Trevor Trehan, is very disappointed at this. Only 1,100 people have registered for the conference, and we're well aware of the fact that there's another 7 billion people out there that we'd like to see connected to CG. So do register and do tell your friends and family that to register for the CG conference. You don't have to pay anything, but you do have to register to participate in the sessions. We'll have Q&A segment in every session, keynotes and panels and the rest. There'll be opportunities for people to speak and to raise questions. It'll be a dialogical conference and with a lot of rich content, a lot of emphasis on decoloniality and racism themes, which have become very important in our work in the last couple of years. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. And once again, Thushari, let me thank you very, very sincerely for your contribution today. Bye for now.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming today.